Hello, it's my great pleasure to introduce once again Nigel Coates, who's going to chair the final inside keynote of this year's festival. Nigel, I hope Tuscany is treating you well. Over to you.
Thank you, Paul. And yes, it is, but it's grey and rainy today, much to all my English friends' surprise. They always think the sun shines in Tuscany, but that's not true. Anyway, it's our great pleasure to welcome Spencer de Grey, who has is a mainstay at the practice of Foster and Partners, joined in 1973 and became a design partner alongside David Nelson in 1991. And I was looking at the extraordinary list of projects realized under Spencer's direction, including the much loved Great Court at the British Museum and the remodeling of Trafalgar Square, which itself has the notorious fourth plinth. Anyway, Spencer has switched around our overall title of Art and Space and is going to tell us his thoughts on architecture and art. Over to you, Spencer.
Thank you very much, and hello everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here this afternoon. If I could have the first slide, I'm going to talk about architecture and art, and that encompasses both living artists and then how you display the work of artists and other artworks in museums and galleries as a second part of the conversation. Over the years, we've worked with many artists. It's been a central theme of the practice almost since the practice started. And I think the key issue is how one integrates art into architecture. So it doesn't look like an afterthought. It feels integrated and part of the building and adds so much to a building. Next. And I'll start with the first experience I personally had of working with an artist in one of our buildings. This, of course, is Stansted. And we worked with Brian Clark to create a focal point, to create a place of perhaps relative quiet for the area where you could get food and drink in a courtyard in the heart of the building. This is a long time ago, and of course, there's been many changes since. But the idea was to reflect the quality of the building and enhance the nature of this space and integrate it within the space. Next. And if we then move on to a number of projects where we worked with Per Arnoldi, the distinguished Danish artist. This is one of his most recent works, a memorial to the Jewish population that perished in World War II, which is recently opened in Denmark. Next. And our first work with him was on the Commerzbank in Frankfurt. And you can see from this diagram on the right that the cores that serve the building are not all together in one place. They're spread across the plan, the triangular plan. And we were very interested in the idea of giving identity to the floor so that you knew which level you were on when you arrived at one of three different core positions. Next. And you can see here the integration of Per's strong use of color, which is a theme that runs through his two-dimensional work. And this hits you, as it were, as you come out of the lifts on a particular floor. Next. And then the theme of color as a wayfinding, coordination, and enlivening the space continues along each of the relatively short routes that takes you to the offices themselves. Next. The next project that we're involved in happened over many years. This was at Imperial College, where over the years we built four new buildings for Imperial. And we worked closely with Per on each of these four buildings. Next. So the first, the Alexander Fleming building, you can see here the central space, which was a study space for postgrads with all the write-up areas for the outside the laboratories tiered above each other up the space. And it's, as you see in the next slide, you can see the space is naturally lit, and Per then added this idea of a strong use of color on one of the walls behind the staircase that is graded from top to bottom, lightest to the top, grading down to a relatively dark orangey yellow at the base. And this is very much the focal point of this big space. Next. And that continued through into some of the rooms and the wayfinding, the signage, the graphics for that. So it was very much an integrated approach to the use of color, the use of art, linked to wayfinding and signage as well. Next. And then that moved on and was refined further in the MES building, which you can see here, another research lab for Imperial College. Next. And the use again of that graded color as you move up the staircase to the upper levels. So again, the color is beginning to build into a theme that runs through all the 4 buildings that we did for Imperial, and in a way creates a very strong identity for those 4 interventions. Next. And you can see here the building, which I'm sure many of you will recognize, on Exhibition Road, the Business Management School on the right, and the main entrance to Imperial College on the left. And for this, Per created a different kind of work using much the same color as before. Next. Which you can see here behind the reception desk, an image of the brain to reflect the identity of Imperial College. It's as a center of excellence, of research, and so on. So again, that theme links together with what we've just seen. And then the final scheme, next, is the administration building in the heart of the inner courtyard at Imperial. And you can see here the facade, which we wanted to break up and fragment into, as it were, something where you didn't read the floors. It was more of an overall composition, which Per and ourselves composed together using different gradations of blue. Next. And the diagonal route that passes through that building is then marked by a double line of columns that single out that very formative driver for the design, that diagonal route. Next. The next project that we worked on was the police memorial with Per, which was a commission that we received in this corner of St. James's Park. And the black wall behind that, there is a vent for London Transport Underground. It was very ugly, so we encapsulated the whole vent in black granite. And that contains the book which the 2 people are looking at, which records all the police that are killed on duty. And then on the right, as it were, like a beacon of hope, is the glass element that sits coming out of a pool, that, as it were, is the inverse of the black granite. Next. And you can see that in more, it glows in the light. It's really quite a positive statement. Next. And then by night, it's illuminated as a blue light, which of course is reflective of the police themselves. Next. And at the Treasury, which was a fascinating project, the reworking of the Treasury, you can see the plan on the right, which has 3 grand courtyards, which we landscaped. And then there are about 14 much smaller courtyards, which were part of the original 1916 natural ventilation scheme for what is a very deep plan building. So all the offices within are naturally ventilated through these courtyards. Next. And you can see on the left one of those courtyards. They were very dingy spaces, clad in a sort of white tiles and much unloved. But they were at the heart of a natural ventilation approach. So we wanted to continue and reinforce the natural ventilation, which led to the diagram on the right, where we enclosed with a foil roof each of the courtyards to create a stack effect for the natural ventilation. Next. And then these spaces became very valuable to the Treasury. They provided spaces for cafes, for libraries, for meeting spaces. All the communal spaces were in these courtyards. And together with Per, we worked on an approach that would enliven these spaces and bring colour into the spaces. And so each space has its own array of banners hanging in the space. Next. And you can see that on the right, this is part of the library. The selection of colors has changed. Next. And then looking down into yet another space, you can see the array of banners that are really quite dramatic in these white enclosed spaces. Next. And very importantly, as you move around the office accommodation, you can read where you are through the color coding that Per developed for the banners. So again, it adds as part of the orientation within this very deep plan building. Next. At the Great Court, when it opened and just before it opened, and as part of the approach to the Great Court, you can see straight on at the ground level, at the court level, a dark opening, which is the entrance into the round reading room. And that, in terms of the scale of the overall courtyard, is very small. And the reason for that is because the horizontal balconies that run around the inside of the round reading room determine the height of the opening. And of course, that was we couldn't touch that. And we worked with the museum on ideas about how one might make more of that entrance. And as part of that, we worked with Anish Kapoor. Next. And you can see Norman and myself and Anish standing looking at the model of the Great Court and looking at the idea of creating a focal point, an incredible elliptical form, reflective elliptical form turned on its end that would draw people towards the door, and then they could move round the ellipse and into the round reading room. Next. And this was an image that we created to show the museum, and the museum were incredibly supportive. But unfortunately, it was never constructed. So that door still remains as rather a small in scale with relation to the whole courtyard. Next. Now turning to three projects where we have been very involved in the setting and the setting of works of art. And these are three museum projects. And so this is the Museum of Fine Art as it was before we started work. And it so often happens with classical buildings, neoclassical buildings, in subsequent generations, the main entrance tends to get changed. And they saw fit in the past to move the main entrance off axis to relate to the car parking on the left-hand side of this image. And the museum is built around two substantial courtyards. We were very keen to reintroduce the main axis and get back to the original intentions of the original architect. Next. And you can see here how we established that north-south axis. It's very important. It links Huntington Avenue, the bottom of the image, with the park beyond, and play down the more recent entrance on the left-hand side. It is still an entrance, but it is not a significant entrance. And then we were asked to then design, in the context of the master plan, the new American wing on the right-hand side of the courtyard. Next. And that American wing, which you can see straight ahead of you with the staircase, is centered on an enclosed courtyard, which is a cafe and restaurant for the museum. Next. And the accommodation is on 3 levels above ground and 1 level below ground. And there are 53 different galleries in the American wing. It's one of the best collections of American art right from the beginning of the States through to the current day. Next. And we were delighted when the museum asked us to be involved in how this incredible collection was going to be displayed. And as part of the process, working closely with the curators of the museum, we built a whole sequence of cardboard models, as you can see on the left, in order to start to get to grips with what was a really very substantial task of laying out those 53 galleries. And of course, it goes back to the Mayan period, and it comes right the way forward to the current day. And these cardboard models we shared, obviously, both with the Board of Trustees and with the curators as the sort of working method for looking at the collection. And you can see on the right how one can then photograph those models and begin to get an idea of what the display actually consists of. And the director of the museum was very keen to have a wide range of different interpretations of the rooms as part of a response to the different periods and types of art. And I think that was very interesting. It was quite a challenge, but it was very, very interesting. Next. Next. And so this is the next stage where we actually illustrated the works as tiny photographs within these models, and that we looked at the color schemes, we looked at the relationship to the three-dimensional work. This is one of the long galleries on one of the floors. Next. And then that translated, next. That translated into reality where you can see the completed configuration of this particular period of the museum's collection. So this was a very fascinating to and froing process with the museum and its curators. Next. And then the top floor, which is flooded with natural light, takes the contemporary collection. The style of these rooms is different from the lower levels. Next. And then the lowest level of all, below ground, you have the earliest work. So you move up in terms of time from the lowest level to the top level of the wing. And again, the character of these rooms responds to the objects and all the discussions we had with the team at the MFA. Next. If we now move south to Palm Beach in Florida, this is a project we completed recently and is a museum that was founded in 1941 with a collection by the Norton family. Next. And when Norton built the museum, it was relatively modest, it was single story, and it was centered on a courtyard. And once again, it was built to neoclassical principles, although it was 1941, and had a very strong axis. Next. But that axis was lost over the years, and the museum expanded in a rather higgledy-piggledy way. Height was added, so the building on the right-hand corner is 3 stories high compared to the single story of the original. And the entrance was moved off the main axis to the right-hand side and related to an area of tarmac. Next. That was the car park. So the entrance was rather undesirable. You walked across the tarmac to enter the building. But of course, everybody in Palm Beach drives cars. But they'd actually found another site for the car parking, so this could be changed. Next. So our strategy was to reinstate the north-south axis, move the entrance from the far side to the street side at the front of this image. The tree is of enormous significance. And then take away all the car parking and set the museum in a new garden and surround it with greenery, which was not only something that was pleasant to visit, but was also an opportunity to display works of art outside as well as inside. Next. So here you are in the garden, and what is extraordinary about working in Palm Beach or Florida generally is this is a photograph about 6 months after this was landscaped, and it is incredibly mature. Everything grows like frenzy in that part of the world, and you can see the Keith Haring at the head of that vista, making a termination of the axis. Next. And then the museum was given 3 Antony Gormley sculptures which stand proudly on the grass lawn, which you can see here. And the design of this garden was to create spaces that were appropriate to specific works of art. Next. And then if you just move backwards, you're looking across the lawn from within the restaurant, and there's a colonnade which is new on the left-hand side. Next. And then inside, facing onto that colonnade in the garden, is the internal sculpture court, as it were. So there's a relationship between the internal works and the external works. So all the sculpture in the collection is gathered around, whether it's internal or external, around the lawn on the right-hand side of that image. Next. And then we carried out a restoration of all the existing galleries. We were lucky that when we peeled back the rather old carpet that was on the floor, we discovered this incredible timber strip floor underneath, which was just literally sanded and sealed and was there to enjoy. And that makes a significant difference to the rooms. It was what was intended. And then working with the curators, the colors of the walls again varied depending on the exhibits. That was all very carefully thought through. Next. But the project also included new space, which I'm not going to talk about this afternoon, but also restoring and creating new galleries within the existing building. We only actually added about 12% new accommodation. The rest was all working with the existing building. Next. And now if we come back to Europe and go to the south of France, this is Narbonne on the Spanish border in the south of France, and a museum for Roman antiquities, which was a competition we won quite a long time ago and is about to have its official opening next week. And you can see the museum sitting on its site. Next. And it's linked into the center of Narbonne along the canal de la Robine, which is part of the network of canals in the south of France. So, and you can walk in about 10 to 15 minutes from the center to the museum. Next. And the museum is part of a cultural recreational area. It's a gateway to the historic center, and it's a single level museum set in a new garden with the canal on the left-hand side and the road access. As you come off the auto route, you go past the museum into the city center, and then the red line denotes the access from both entry directions, arriving roughly in the middle, the main entrance to the museum. Next. And the reception is therefore obviously next door to the entrance. Next. And then we have a long gallery, 70 meters long by 7 meters high, which contains the lapidary wall, which I'll come back to in just a minute. Next. And then the permanent collection next, and the temporary gallery. And finally, what is very important is that nearly half of the building, about a third of the building, is given over to research. So it's very much a living, working building, as well as a museum of the antiquities they've already discovered. Next. So this is the view as you approach from the canal. It's a single story, 7 meter, as I said, internal height. And it's a concrete structure, roof structure, and concrete walls that support it. Next. And you can see here that axis that I've just been talking about. This is coming off the road, the parking area on the roadside, walking along the colonnade under the shelter of the overhanging roof to the entrance, which is in the distance. And then eventually there'll be a full-blown formal garden on the right-hand side. Next. And then you've entered into the museum and you're looking towards the lapidary wall with reception desks and shop and catering on the right-hand side. Next. And so this is your first proper glimpse of that lapidary wall. It houses 900 funerary stones that were in the city's possession, but not very much visited. And all of those have been carefully restored and then arranged on a shelving system as individual elements. And I'll come back to that in a second. Next. And here you are looking along the full length virtually, and into the lapidary wall are two audio-visual displays which explain the stones, what they mean, where they came from. Many of them were on the outside of Narbonne as funerary monuments. Next. And Narbonne, if you can believe it, was the biggest conurbation outside of Italy under the Romans. It was a very, very important port on the borders, as I say, of Spain and France. And it was part of a route that linked Rome to Cadiz along the Mediterranean. Next. And sorry, can I just go back one? Sorry. And it would be typically like the Via Appia Antica. The roads leading out of Narbonne would have funerary monuments along the length of it, in the same way as happens, as you can see, in Rome today. Next. In the Middle Ages, they plundered all those stones and built them into the new city walls, which you can see an etching of here. And that was fairly typical, the reuse of these stones into the current demands and needs of a city. Next. When the railway came to Narbonne, they destroyed the city walls, but luckily an Enlightenment individual saved the Roman stones and put them into a Romanesque church, which is where they've been until they moved into the new museum. Next. And what is so important about the shelving system is not just for display, it is actually a working archaeological setup. So this gantry moves up and down the 70 meters and can pick any one of the stones, take it out and put it on the shelving, which relates to the research side on the right-hand side. So it's very much working as well as for visitors. Next. And you can see the full length that leads you down to the permanent galleries. And we worked on the display and the arrangement with Adrian Gardere, who amongst many other distinguished projects worked on the new Louvre at Lens, where he was responsible for the display of the permanent collection. Next. And you can see here the layout of the permanent collection. Next. And then the opportunity, this is one of Adrian's mock-ups of the display, of using the horizontally banded concrete walling laid in layers and tamped reflecting the local colors of the earth against which the stone exhibits were placed. Next. And here you can see a typical part of that. Next. And then at one point you can see through back to the lapidary wall, so you get that interaction between the exhibits in the permanent collection related to the stones displayed in the big hall. So there's a dialogue between the two. Next. And here you're looking down another of the rooms with an anchor. The work is very much in progress in Narbonne. They discover new things virtually every day. So again, this is a flexible space where change can take place as the collection grows. Next. And then this is the view of the museum as you say farewell. Next. I've got just 2 more or 3 more slides. This is Slusen in Stockholm, and which is completely reorganizing the waterfront and rearranging the public transport. And as part of that, there's a new bus garage, which is a cave within the granite wall, within the granite of the city. Next. Next. And that you can see here. And this was our first interpretation. It's totally underground. There's no natural light. So we create our own environment. This is the main concourse, and it's actually very cave-like. And we've suggested that that should be painted Swedish red, that wonderful color between brown and red. Next. And then with the city, Gunilla Klingberg was appointed to work with us on an artwork. And she was very much influenced by the fact that this was a center of silk making in the 18th century. And that was the inspiration behind her suggestions. Next. And of course, one knows patterns like this extraordinarily well. Next. But then she began to totally reinterpret those traditional patterns. And this is, as it were, throwing a silk scarf onto the floor in a sort of crumpled heap, elongated because of the length of the hall. Next. And that you can then see translated into a pattern, which is really totally abstract, but does have its roots back to that silk weaving original location on this site. Next. And then you can see how that has transformed the space, uniting the Swedish red enclosure, and she's chosen to continue the Swedish red in the floor, so it becomes a single space. And we've now excavated the cave, and the fit out will start, and her work will start shortly. And I think on that note, I'll end. I'm sorry if I'm a few minutes late.
Don't worry, Spencer. Thank you so much. Just to be clear, is that last project underground?
Yes, completely underground. It is
Because
literally.
it looks like part of a tube network.
Yes, but it's part of the bus network rather than the tube network. So it's a proper bus station, and that's the waiting.
An ex-bus station, or it also connects to a bus station?
No, all the buses draw up either side of that long space. You go through the arches onto your bus, and they
How
are
fantastic.
also underground.
So
Yes,
it's a real hybrid program, the most hybrid of all the ones that you've showed, except perhaps the only pristine new building in what you showed was Stansted. All the others,
Yes.
it seems to me, were they were responses to existing buildings or kind of or complexes, and I'm wondering the extent to which you, as one of the partners, are you particularly interested in a dialogue with the past manifestations of buildings?
Well, I think I'm particularly interested in any form of cultural or educational building. And of course, many cultural buildings, particularly in the world of museums, I mean, Narbonne is a brand new building. There was nothing there. So that was a brand new building.
Okay, so
But
that's I'm mistaken about that one,
yes,
but
and
that
so
had a very rich kind of resource in the lapidary stones,
yes,
which
yes,
one part of the city wall.
yes. So I think many museum projects, well, quite a lot of museum projects are working within an existing building. I mean, the Great Court is a perfect example of that.
But what
You
I'm
know,
trying
there
to
are.
get from you, Spencer, is whether this is a particular importance to you.
No, I think it's of great importance to the practice. I think ever since the Sackler galleries, we have been interested in working within existing buildings. I think, and it's particularly relevant, more relevant today than it's ever been, because it's far more sustainable to use an existing building rather than knocking it down and building a new building.
It
So
is,
the
but
use of
forgive me if I bring up the fact that Foster and Partners is often associated with sparkling 100% new buildings. Does this mean that the culture of the practice is changing?
No, I think we started with the Sackler galleries, and ever since that day, we have worked within the context of existing buildings as well as building new buildings.
No, and
Um,
very successfully, I acknowledge. Uh,
I think
so
as
where
an
does that leave the new building then in that case?
I think, well, new buildings are very important, and many of the architects listening to this will be involved in the design of new buildings. And often those can be on sites where, you know, if there is an existing building, it's probably not in any way fit for purpose. Um, so I think I think the balance between new and existing is an important discussion, and I think it's an area of investigation that we have been involved in for many years.
Well, I think we acknowledge that the way that we are now aware of the need to be resourceful and to make use of what exists has sort of shifted and will continue to shift, which
Yes,
means that the skill the practice has at working in existing buildings, and the Sackler Galleries being a great early example where you succeeded in turning basically an ignored space into something that was a positive contribution to the whole of the Royal Academy complex, and it was greatly
yes.
admired for doing that. So, having discussed that, I'd like to also ask about another aspect that's associated with the practice is the sort of the mechanical and kind of technical aspect of buildings. And I was particularly taken with the mechanism that allows the lapidary stones in the Narbonne building to move around it. And I was wondering if the practice actually developed that idea of, well, the storage shelving and the device that allows access to those various stones. Is that part of what you do, or do you hand that over to somebody else?
No, I think, you know, I think right from the beginning, the brief for the Narbonne project was it was a working collection, and some, but not all of that collection was on display for the public to see in the public rooms. And so the display of the stones themselves, which is the sort of centerpiece of their collection, needed to have access. It is not too difficult to take, you know, a sculpted head and move that with great care for research purposes. But the stones were substantial, and there were 900 of them. So the idea of using a mechanical system to move the stones into the research areas seemed like a very positive idea, and that was what we developed, and it fits the brief. Basically, it's a response to the brief of having access to these objects.
No, I realize that, but culturally, it's also very close to a forklift truck moving items around a warehouse, which I think is intriguing. Which is, at the other end of the cultural spectrum from art. So, they come together. Art and mechanics come together in your solutions for these museum environments. Another thing I'm curious about is if the practice, how far the practice goes in designing the plinths and the stands and the support of the actual objects being displayed. Would you ever go so far as to design a frame for a painting, or would you stop at that? And presumably, you will be making, if it's a Roman head or a piece of sculpture, is the practice designing the actual point of contact between the artwork and the support?
Well, at the Museum of Fine Art, we designed all the cases and the plinths and so on for mainly the three-dimensional work. Obviously, the paintings themselves came with their frames. I mean, they were already framed. They were already in the collection. When it came to Narbonne, as I said, Adrian Gardere joined the team, and in this instance, he was designing the way in which the exhibits were uh, displayed. But that was done very closely with us, and we worked very closely as a team together on the project. And I think, again, it was a good example of not inviting an external, as it were, external firm to work in isolation of the architecture, but to work totally together.
Well, I see that, just
That
I'm
was
going to
our
wrap up
yes,
soon, but the examples you showed of artists' contribution to the architectural environment, such as Per, uh,
yes, Arnoldi,
Per, yes, Per Adoni.
Arnoldi, yes,
I've written it down. So anyway, but in that case, in the case of the contribution of the artist it doesn't have the kind of stark uh, 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 disconnect between the usual white gallery space and the artwork. Most artists and most curators want neutral white spaces. Whereas if you're working with an artist, I note that the integration doesn't have that. It's as your gesture was exactly like this, but it doesn't have the stark juxtaposition that many artworks have with their environment. They seem very restrained, to put a word on it. They're
I think
beautiful, but it's hard to see them as artworks because they're so integrated with the building.
well, there are other examples which I didn't touch on where the artwork is more clearly, as it were, an individual piece.
Well,
Okay.
Spencer, thank you so much. We're out of time, unfortunately, but it's been very informative, and I'm very much enjoyed what you showed today. Thank you so much. Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Bye.